Imagine standing knee-deep in a freezing, sulfur-stinking swamp. The mud sucks at your boots, and the smell of rotten eggs fills your nose. This isn't a battlefield, it's a mine. But you aren't digging for gold or diamonds. You are hunting for something far more valuable to a Viking: bog iron. This reddish, rusty sludge is the lifeblood of the Norse war machine. While other cultures dug deep into the earth for ore, the Vikings harvested theirs from the living landscape. It was believed to be a gift from the gods, because, unlike rock ore, bog iron literally grew back. Every 20 years or so, the iron-rich bacteria in the water would deposit a new layer of nodules, making the swamp a renewable factory of death. But harvesting it was brutal work. A team of smiths would spend weeks dragging wooden rakes through the mire, pulling up heavy, wet clumps of iron ore. They would haul hundreds of kilos of this muck back to the settlement, their hands cracked and bleeding from the cold. But the real danger hadn't even started. This raw sludge was full of water and clay pockets. If you threw it directly into a fire, the trapped steam would explode like a grenade, showering you with molten rock. So, before the forging could even begin, the ore had to be roasted, dried out over open fires until it cracked and hissed, releasing its moisture and preparing for the crucible. The transition from mud to metal required a vessel capable of containing hellfire. This wasn't just a campfire, it was a technological marvel built from dirt. Building the furnace was an art form. The smiths would mix river clay with crushed shells and straw, kneading it into a thick paste to build a chimney that stood waist high. This bloomery furnace was a delicate beast. If the walls were too thin, they would melt. If they were too thick, they wouldn't heat up. It had to be perfect. Once built, it was loaded with alternating layers of charcoal and roasted ore. Then, the marathon began. To turn rock into metal, you need temperatures hitting 1,200 degrees Celsius, 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Achieving this heat without modern machinery required human lungs of leather. The bellows. For 6 to 8 grueling hours, apprentices would pump the bellows rhythmically, forcing a blast of oxygen into the heart of the furnace. It was a rhythm of life and death. Stop for a minute, and the temperature drops, turning the iron into useless slag. Pump too hard, and you melt the furnace wall. It was said that a good smith could judge the temperature just by the color of the flame, looking for a white-hot intensity that signaled the transformation was happening. But the result of this exhausting labor wasn't a shiny axe head. It was a bloom, a gross, spongy lump of glowing slag and iron that looked more like a meteorite than a weapon. When the smelt was finished, the smiths would smash open the clay walls of the furnace they had spent days building. Out tumbled the bloom, a fiery, sparking mass, weighing about 10 to 15 kilos. This was the moment of truth. If the smelt had failed, the bloom would be brittle and useless. If it succeeded, it was a rough gem waiting to be polished, but there was no time to celebrate. The bloom was rapidly cooling, and as it cooled, it hardened. Using massive wooden mallets, the smiths would beat the bloom while it was still white hot. This wasn't shaping, this was purification. They were literally squeezing the glass-like liquid slag out of the iron sponge, consolidating it into a solid mass. It was violent, loud, and dangerous work. Sparks flew everywhere, burning skin and hair. This process, called shingling, had to be done before the metal dropped below a critical temperature. If they failed, the iron would be riddled with impurities, and the axe would shatter on the first impact. Once the bloom was consolidated into a rough bar of iron, the true artistry began. This was where the blacksmith ceased to be a laborer and became a magician. Viking axes weren't just lumps of iron hammered flat. They were sophisticated composites. Iron is soft. It bends. Steel is hard. It holds an edge, but can snap. The genius of the Viking smith was to combine them. They would take the soft, tough bog iron and fold it over itself repeatedly, creating a laminated structure that was incredibly resilient. This absorbed the shock of a blow, preventing the axe from breaking when it hit a shield or a helmet, but a soft axe won't cut. So, for the cutting edge, they used their most precious material: high carbon steel. This was often traded from far away or carefully produced in small quantities. The smith would split the iron axe body open like a hot dog bun and insert a wedge of this hard steel into the gap. This technique, called insert welding, required perfect timing. With the metal glowing yellow hot, the smith would hammer the layers together, fusing them into a single, seamless piece using sand as a flux to prevent oxidation. If the weld held, you had a weapon with a spine of iron and a tooth of steel. But if you missed a hit, or if the fire was dirty, the weld would fail, and the axe would peel apart like wet cardboard. Now came the most mystical and perilous step, the quench. The axe head was shaped, the edge was sharp, but the metal was still soft. To harden the steel edge, it had to be shocked. The smith would heat the blade one last time to a critical cherry red color, specifically looking for the moment the metal lost its magnetism. Then, with a prayer to the gods, he would plunge the glowing edge into a vat of oil, water, or sometimes, famously, urine. The liquid would boil instantly, screaming as it cooled the metal in seconds. This thermal shock froze the carbon atoms into a crystal structure called martensite, the hardest form of steel. But this was a gamble. If the blade cooled too fast, it would crack with a loud ping, the sound of a smith's heart breaking. If it cooled too slow, it would stay soft. The difference between a masterwork and scrap metal was a matter of seconds. Assuming the blade survived the quench, it was now hard as glass, but just as brittle. It needed to be tempered, slowly reheated to relax the internal stresses, trading a little hardness for the toughness needed to survive a battlefield. The final stage was a test of patience. The black, scaled axe head was taken to the grinding stone, a massive wheel of sandstone turned by hand. For hours, the smith would grind the edge, pouring water over it to keep the friction from ruining the temper. They weren't just making it sharp, they were shaping the geometry of the cut. A battle axe needed a different edge profile than a wood axe, thinner to slice through flesh, but reinforced to punch through mail. Finally, the blade was polished. Vikings prized aesthetics. They would use acid to etch the blade, revealing the wavy patterns of the folded metal, a visual proof of the weapon's quality. Some smiths would inlay silver or copper wires into the axe head, creating intricate geometric patterns or runic inscriptions. These weren't just decorations, they were magical wards, imbuing the weapon with the power to protect its wielder. But a head without a handle is just a paperweight. The final marriage of wood and metal was the crucial link. The handle, or haft, was typically made of ash or elm woods, known for their flexibility and shock absorption. A rigid wood, like oak, would snap upon impact, leaving the warrior defenseless. The haft was hand-carved to fit the eye of the axe perfectly. It wasn't glued, it was wedged. The smith would drive a wooden or metal wedge into the top of the handle, expanding the wood so tightly against the iron that it became immovable. The length of the handle depended on the axe's purpose. A Dane axe might have a haft as long as a man is tall, designed to cleave through horse and rider alike. A bearded axe, with its hooked blade, had a shorter handle for close quarters grappling, allowing a warrior to hook an opponent's shield and pull it down. The balance had to be perfect. Too heavy, and it was slow. Too light, and it lacked power. When the final wedge was driven home, the axe was complete. It was no longer a piece of the swamp. It was a slayer, a shield biter, ready to carve its name into history. From the stinking mud of a peat bog to the shining edge of a battle-ready weapon, the journey of a Viking axe is a testament to human ingenuity and endurance. It required a mastery of earth, fire, water, and air. These weren't crude tools made by barbarians. They were sophisticated pieces of metallurgical engineering that allowed the Norsemen to conquer half the known world. So, the next time you see a Viking axe in a movie, remember the sweat, the burns, and the thousands of hammer blows that went into making it. It wasn't just forged in fire, it was summoned from the earth itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the sparks and sweat of the Viking Forge, hit that like button and subscribe. What ancient weapon should we forge next? Let us know in the comments below.